But if you receive a GOMOR, you rebut it, and that rebuttal is unsuccessful, your days in the Army are likely numbered. It's just a matter of, are you going to be able to go to a board or not? And if you are you going to be able to win at a board?
All right, Tim. So we meet again. We're going to be talking about GOMORs. I kind of want to dig into what it is and why it's important, when it comes to careers and military defense. So let's start right into why a GOMOR is important within the military justice system.
Well, with a GOMOR, and essentially for those, if you don't know what a GOMOR is, it's a General Officer Memorandum of Reprimand. In the military, we have to have an acronym for anything. So a GOMOR is a General Officer Memorandum of Reprimand. It's unique to the Army. Only the Army has the GOMOR. Every other service has something similar. They may call it a NIPLOC or something else, like a non-punitive letter of reprimand. But we don't see these given by the other services. We do, but not at the rate we do in the Army. When we do these types of rebuttals, it is 90% Army cases where we're doing rebuttals. The Army loves the GOMOR. And what a GOMOR is when you have a GOMOR, you have 7 days to save your career. And I say that the GOMOR triggers 7 days for you to save your career. You can have a 7-year career. You can be a 17-year non-commissioned officer or an officer. If you get a GOMOR, the clock starts and you have 7 days from receipt of the GOMOR to save your career, bottom line. Now, there's ways to get extensions on that. But when I say you have 7 days to save your career, that is unequivocally true. And so what is a GOMOR? Again, a GOMOR is when the commanding general makes the decision to give you a reprimand, which is why it's a General Officer Memorandum of Reprimand. And that's going to be worded saying you are reprimanded. It's going to say what you're reprimanded for. What we see these for is BAH fraud, sexual harassment. We're even seeing these for sexual assault cases, which I can talk about a little bit later in this, as we do this recording. And then from there, you get a copy of the evidence that was used to formulate the GOMOR, and you have 7 days to draft and submit the rebuttal matters. And mind you, you have to understand that the investigation that led up to this may have been going on for a month, 6 months, or even a year. I've seen investigations where you have a service member under investigation for a year, and then it's, here's your GOMOR, you have 7 days to respond. And from there, you have to then draft a rebuttal. We can walk through how we draft rebuttal matters, what makes a successful rebuttal, and so on. You draft the rebuttal matters, those get submitted back to the commanding general, and the commanding general makes a decision. The commanding general, he or she has one of 3 decisions to make, with some exception. They can, number one, destroy the GOMOR, tear it up, say, yep, you've rebutted it sufficiently, these events did not occur, and they're going to destroy the GOMOR. The second thing they can do is they can locally file it. That means it gets locally filed, so it doesn't go in your AMHR. It means it goes basically in the top desk drawer, and as long as you don't commit any other additional misconduct before you PCS, that GOMOR is not going to follow you. So it's called locally filing a GOMOR, which is substantially similar to having it destroyed. It's just, hey, don't screw up. If you get a locally filed GOMOR for BH fraud, don't steal any more money in the next 6 months before you PCS, you're good to go. And then if it's permanently filed, that's going to stay in your AMHR or in your permanent file for the rest of your career, which means that promotion boards are going to be able to see this, gaining commands are going to be able to see this, and it's going to drive likely a separation board. If you're an officer, that's a board of inquiry or a BOI or a show cause board, they're kind of one and the same. Or if you're enlisted, it's going to drive an administrative separation board. And so we can walk through kind of what all of those mean. But if you receive a GOMOR, you rebut it, and that rebuttal is unsuccessful, your days in the Army are likely numbered. It's just a matter of, are you going to be able to go to a board or not? And if you are you going to be able to win at a board?
So, but what's the difference between a GOMOR and a court-martial then?
Well, a court-martial is criminal in nature. So a court-martial means that you're going to a criminal trial, you have charges preferred against you, and if you have a right to a jury, you have a right to production of evidence, and the government has to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah,
that's what a court-martial or a trial is. So what happens? So typically, the way this works, Jason, is there'll be an investigation into a case, whether that's the AR-15-6 investigation, whether that's the CID investigation, and that will go to either the command or OSTIC. Remember, OSTC is the Office of the Special Trial Counsel. They're the ones who make all the decisions in sex assault cases. So it will either go to OSTC if it's a sexual assault or a sharp case, or it'll go to your chain of command if it's BAH or anything, a fight, an aggravated assault, whatever it happens to be, that's non-OSTIC. From there, a decision is going to be made saying, are we going to take this to court-martial or not? If a decision is made to take it to court-martial, then charges are preferred against you, which is the functional equivalent of being indicted, and you're facing criminal charges. That's going to a court-martial. And if you're convicted, now you have a criminal record, you can be going to prison. A whole host of bad consequences can occur. On the other side, it's non-judicial. So think of NJP, non-judicial punishment, like in Article 15. This is an adverse administrative action, so it's short of a court-martial. So what happens is they say, either we don't think the charges are severe enough to warrant a court-martial, or more often than not in the Army, is we don't think we can prove it at a court-martial. We don't have enough evidence, we can't get beyond a reasonable doubt, the case isn't strong enough, the alleged victim doesn't want to participate, you name it, they don't think they can get a conviction, so they'll go the route of a GOMOR. And when that's the case, you have a lot fewer rights. So number one, you don't have beyond a reasonable doubt. You're not getting a jury. You don't have the right to production of evidence. All of the things you have, all of the rights you have constitutionally guaranteed, and under the UCMJ you don't have. You get a letter saying, Captain Schmedlap, you sexually assaulted a fellow soldier on this day. You are hereby reprimanded. You have 7 days to file a rebuttal. I've got 7 days to draft a rebuttal to a sexual assault charge. And we see this a lot now in cases where the OSTIC defers the charges, meaning that they don't think there's enough evidence to go forward to prefer charges. So now you have 7 days to do written rebuttal matters that you didn't sexually assault someone. Where in my mindset is, if you actually believe someone sexually assaulted a fellow soldier, why the hell are we at a GOMOR? This should be at a court-martial.
Sure.
But the reality is they didn't have enough evidence, or the victim didn't want to go forward, or whatever it is, so it goes to a GOMOR. So that's the real difference. And again, it can be sexual assault. BAH cases it's very common for BAH cases to go to GOMORs. And there's not a specific dollar limit, but every jurisdiction seems to have a dollar limit. In Korea, for example, where BAH is probably the most prevalent, or OHA fraud in the world, it seems that, at least currently, and this can change with every kind of administration or cycle of prosecutors, if the fraud is under $20,000, they don't prosecute it. So if you steal $15,000 or $18,000 of BAH fraud, typically they're saying that's not enough to go to a court-martial, so you get a GOMOR. The GOMOR gets permanently filed, and from there you either are kicked out of the Army or you have a right to an administrative separation board. Now, let's make it abundantly clear, that's not a hard and fast rule, but I see probably 10, 15 BAH fraud cases a year out of Korea, and that's what we're seeing. So higher dollar amounts are going to court-martial, lower dollar amounts are going to GOMORs. Likewise, sex assault cases. Sex assault case where, let's say you have an alleged victim who makes an allegation, maybe they want their 100% disability rating and do MTRS, and they make an allegation. They want the documentation so they can go to VA and get their rating, and it's a completely false claim. The investigation goes forward. They say they don't want to participate in the investigation or the trial, and so instead of, they say, well, we can't go to trial because we don't have a alleged victim that's going to testify. OSTIC defers it. They'll send it to a GOMOR. And now the CG signs off on it saying, hey, use your bad paper saying you sexually assaulted someone, which is not how that usually comes about.
As a defense attorney, does it kind of wet your palate when you get a client that says, hey, listen, I've got this GOMOR, I need to get this thing settled. Obviously, I only have 7 days. Do you feel as a defense attorney, you're like, that's good that you're in a GOMOR instead of a court-martial, because that means that the evidence is lighter than if they were charging you with a court-martial? Is that the thought process you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really depends, right? So yes, it is a lesser charge. The consequences are lower, but the likelihood of getting burned or losing your career to GOMOR could be higher, right? And what I mean by that is, let's say if you have a sex assault case at a GOMOR, you know from the get-go that the case is trash. It is complete garbage, and no one believed in this case. CID didn't believe in it. The prosecutors didn't believe in it. Because if in the world of SHARP, or the Sexual Harassment and Assault Program in the military, where you can't go into any Army with training without getting berated with SHARP propaganda.
Yeah.
In that world that we live in currently, and that may change with this new administration, we'll see. But the world we currently live in, if an allegation is made and there's not enough evidence, and they believed it occurred, you tell me it doesn't go to a court-martial? Come on. That's nonsensical. So when I hear a sexual assault case at a GOMOR, it's really twofold. I tell a client, hey, we're fortunate this is not trial. We're fortunate we don't have to go through the crucible of a trial where if you lose, you're going to go to prison. You're going to be dishonorably discharged. You're going to be a sex offender. All these negative consequences are going to occur. So that's good. But on the other hand, I say we could have won this at trial. Like my degree of confidence in winning this at trial is exceptionally high.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Because the victim is incredible. Maybe there's DNA evidence which contradicts her story. There's a whole host of reasons why this isn't a court-martial. And I could have won this at a trial hands down. So while you would have had to go through that process, my confidence level in the ability to win this is exceptionally high. Where now I say, now we have to do this at a GOMOR. I don't get a jury. I don't have beyond a reasonable doubt. I now have 7 days. And I say the 7 days, there's an asterisk on that because as a civilian defense counsel, we can almost always get an extension. Without CDC, or maybe with TDS you can, but you get 7 days. But if I put a notice in, it's like, hey, I'm in trial, I need you, whatever, because of my schedule, I need 7 more days. I need 14 more days. I can't remember a time when that hasn't been granted, where my extension hasn't been granted. But the rule says 7 days, but you can get an extension.
Okay, good.
But now I have to get sworn statements. I have to get my own affidavits. I have to do my own investigation. I have to then take everything I would do in a 4, 5, 6, 7 day trial and put that on paper, which is a lot more challenging to do. Now, the GOMOR rebuttals that our office drafts, I mean, frankly, I'm happy to say I think are the best in the business. Because Ben Gold, the other attorney in my law firm, he is without question the best writer I've ever come across in 20 plus years of practice. He's a better writer than I am. He's a better writer than anyone I've ever had work for me. And he's a better writer than anyone I've ever come across. He is the best in the business. And I say that with all candor. It's hard for me to admit someone's better at something than I am. He's better at writing than I am.
Is it because he's more concise, he can make them shorter, or he just makes better points?
He is a wordsmith.
Okay.
And he has the ability, within the first paragraph, he draws you in. He writes these almost like a movie script. And what I mean by that is there's an opening scene in a movie that draws you in where you want to watch the movie. Okay? Almost always. And because if there's not something that draws you and makes you want to read it, it's not going to get read. Think about the audience. The audience is a 1, 2, or typically a 3-star commanding general. Is a commanding general going to read a 30-page memorandum unless it's compelling? No. Is a 1-page memorandum going to get the job done? No. And so the way Ben drafts these is he draws the reader in a way that there's a compelling narrative to everything that we do. There's a backstory. There's a protagonist. There's an antagonist. There's a backstory behind what occurred. And the way he weaves the writing together is you have to see. A non-lawyer could read these and say, wow, this is fascinating. It's highly interesting reading, and it's advocacy at its highest level. So it's not what we typically see is these are the legal elements of the offense. You didn't meet the elements. It's kind of boring reading. Right.
So a good rebuttal is almost like storytelling in legal, but with legal arguments behind it.
100%. No different than a compelling closing argument is storytelling. If you ever listen to great trial closing arguments, whether you listen to old Johnny Cochran closing arguments, whether you watch one of mine, or I think one of the best in the business that closing arguments is a guy named Mike Waddington, who is a great friend of mine. He's does what I do down in Miami. His closing arguments are phenomenal, and he wrote a book on closing arguments because they draw the audience in. It's like if you ever gone to a conference and someone's speaking, or whether it's a class, and after 10 minutes, like wah, 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 like the Charlie Brown.
Yeah.
No one's listening. Everyone's tuned out. You're trying to think of what you're doing next. You're half asleep. There are so many closing arguments in trial that are like that, and you lose the jury. And so you have to be a compelling storyteller. And if you're a compelling storyteller and can weave the story together in a compelling way that stays true to the facts, where at the end, the audience in a trial, it's a jury, says, I'm the star of the show, the jury's because I can right this wrong. I now have the power as a juror to right this wrong, to fix this injustice, or to to take action somehow, that's how you get juries to act, as opposed to just giving them the elements. So if you can then do that in written format, in a compelling narrative that is at a high enough level where you can do that at a level for a commanding general, a 2 or 3 star, and that's exceptionally difficult to do, you're going to win.
How long are these GOMOR rebuttals typically when you guys write them, whether it's you or Ben who writes them? Are they 30 pages long sometimes, or like what's the average?
Typically, they're 15, 20 pages long. And we will sometimes submit packets that are 100 pages. We've submitted packets that are 150, 200 pages.
Jeez.
And you're like, well, how the hell is a CG going to read this? We do a bluff in the front, a bottom line up front. Almost every fact that we allege, we back up. And so if we say Johnny said A, B, C, D, and E, there's usually a footnote and a sworn statement from Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
If we are saying that these text messages were sent, there's a footnote and it shows the text messages. And so what happens is, as the reader or the commanding general, he wants to validate, or she wants to validate the facts. And so as we're going through the facts, by fact 3 or 4, they've validated them. They're done validated for the most part because they know we're shooting them straight.
Yeah.
Because the minute you lose credibility in a GOMOR rebuttal is no different than losing credibility in a trial. If you lose credibility, you're out. And so if there's something you need to take ownership of, take ownership of it. And if there's not, there's not. And so it's creating these narratives, which Ben is so exceptionally good at, that when I read these rebuttals, what we'll do, and this, the backstories, we'll take a look at, someone hires us for a GOMOR rebuttal. Oftentimes they're hiring us for the GOMOR rebuttal, or we've been representing them through the 15-6 or the CID investigation, and now it's a GOMOR rebuttal. So oftentimes we have good essay on the case. We understand the facts of the case. We're not picking this up fresh, because it's very difficult to pick it up fresh. And so if you're under investigation, hire us now. Don't wait till you get a GOMOR rebuttal. Try to get on my calendar. By the time you get on my calendar, it's day 2, day 3, I'm in Japan. And then we have 3 days left for me to get an extension. And if I don't get an extension, I can't help you. So if you're under investigation and you want to hire us to do the GOMOR rebuttal, hire us early, because then all of the back work is already done. It makes our life so much easier to do GOMOR rebuttals for current clients, because we've been working the case off now for 6 or 7 months. Now, all that being said, when we do these rebuttals, Ben and I will talk through and say, what's the narrative? What's the story we want to tell? We'll whiteboard these. We'll storyboard these. And every GOMOR rebuttal that our law office does starts with a blank sheet of paper. Trial Defense Service has these templates, and these templates are absolute trash, because the CG sees the same damn template over and over and over. And that's not a knock on TDS. TDS does not have the manpower to do this, or the time. A GOMOR rebuttal is a 40 to 60 hour project. Some are 100 hours. People say, why does a GOMOR rebuttal cost $15,000? Why does a GOMOR rebuttal cost $20,000 to do? Well, because for us to take this on and give a product that's going to be compelling, supported by the facts, and that's going to win, you can't do some template. You can pay someone $2,000 for a rebuttal and you're going to lose it. Because you cannot put, if you look at the money is time, right? So when you pay money, you're buying a lawyer's time is what you're doing. And I know that these rebuttals are 40, 50, 60 hour projects. Some have turned into 100 hour projects.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yes. We're basically taking an entire trial, putting it together and putting it on paper. And so what we'll do is, once we'll storyboard these. I've got a big whiteboard in my office, and we'll storyboard with the boxes and the flow charts how we want this rebuttal to play out. And it's almost like scripting a movie sometimes, because we say, who's the antagonist? Who's the protagonist? Who's the bad guy? Who's the villain? And who's the hero of this story? And that may sound silly, but you'd be surprised. Sometimes the villain is the command, or the commander, or it's the IG, or it is someone that wronged you, or it's the way the investigation was done. Other times it's an alleged victim. Other times it's finance. And so we have to put all this together, and we storyboard this, talk it through. And then once we have the story we want to tell, then it's supporting it with the facts and putting it in writing. And that's I do a lot of the narrative. I do a lot of the storyboarding. That's a lot of what I do. Ben takes that and drafts these brilliant rebuttals. I edit them, and they'll go through 3 or 4 rounds of edits. So what you have is a 40, 50, 60, 100-hour project at our firm. But when we get these, they get read. And I can guarantee you they get read. There are some things that have happened from GOMOR rebuttals that our firm has filed that would blow your mind. There have been cases, Jason, where our GOMOR rebuttals, we will allege misconduct on the part of the command, maybe a first sergeant or another individual, and I'm not going to allege misconduct against someone unless I believe it actually occurred. But we will. If that's what happened, we will. And I've had our GOMOR rebuttals start additional investigations where investigations have started because of ours. I will, in every GOMOR rebuttal, I will direct to the commanding general that I'm confident that this GOMOR rebuttal may drive additional questions. I'm available. Call me, email me. I'll do a meeting with you. Or if you have additional RFIs, the request for information, push them to us. And the crazy part of this is I've seen cases where CID does an investigation, we do our GOMOR rebuttal, and the commanding general has more faith and belief in our GOMOR rebuttal, has actually asked our office through their SJA to do additional investigating. Like, we want, Mr. Bilecki, we've received your GOMOR rebuttal. The commanding general would like additional statements on these issues. And they're going back to us for more information. I mean, which is kind of nuts because they have their own investigative agencies. And then you're pretty much, you're going to win this.
Because now you know that they're paying attention to you now. If you don't mind, can I rewind to something you said earlier? You're talking about the villain. What happens when you have a GOMOR that the villain is actually part of the command that's conducting the GOMOR?
Well, then you call it out, right? You call it out. Because you're never going to have, the commanding general is not going to be the villain because the commanding general is one level removed from most of this. And so we just did this recently. It's funny you mentioned that, where the villain was the brigade commander, the 06, who reports to the CG. And we thought that the brigade commander was involved in some misconduct and really covered up some issues and swept some things under the rug. And we called him out. And we knew that this brigade commander would be in the CC and the chop chain for this. Because when the GOMOR gets submitted, it goes to the SJA, and then it goes back to the soldier's chain of command for recommendations on this, right? And we called out the battalion commander, the brigade commander. Both of those were in the recommendation chain. And one of the JAGs who was representing the alleged victim.
Okay.
This was fire. I mean, this was one where, okay, let's make sure everything's right because it's going to cause some issues. Because the individuals who are going to be making a recommend to the commanding general are getting thrown under the bus with evidence that proves it.
That now that the general who's reviewing this can't ignore.
Yeah. Well, in that particular case, which was interesting, it never went to the general. A recommendation was made to withdraw the GOMOR.
I'm sorry, say again?
A recommendation was made to withdraw the GOMOR.
Okay.
So we submitted the matters. Chain of command's like, oh, crap. If this goes up, we're going to get under investigation.
Yeah.
A recommendation was made to withdraw the GOMOR without providing our matters. The general officer memorandum of reprimand was withdrawn.
Is there...
real quick, if you're going to do that, you have to be right. And what I mean by that is you can't just say, burn the bridges down. We're always going to throw the command under the bus. Because we do a lot of GOMOR rebuttals in Korea. For whatever reason, we do a lot in Korea, U.S. Army, Japan, and even in Hawaii. For whatever reason, we do a lot out there. A commanding general may be out there for 2 or 3 years. He knows our law firm. Mm-hmm. He knows when something comes across his desk from Bilecki Law Group, you need to pay attention to it. And so every single rebuttal is, hey, your command failed you. It's the same old hat. It gets overplayed. Mm-hmm. So only play that card when it's warranted. It goes back to credibility. You have to have credibility. And there are other times when your client is the villain, right? Where your client it's obvious they've screwed up. It's obvious they've had issues. And sometimes you got to fall on your sword and explain why things happen. And the crazy, not the crazy part, but when you do so many of these, and a command general just read your GOMOR rebuttal, throwing his entire chain of command under the bus. And then the next one is, bottom line up front, Staff Sergeant Smith, it admits to the misconduct, is essentially appreciative that he was receiving it out of GOMOR, but here's this soldier's backstory as to why this occurred. Here's the extenuating mitigating events and why this should be locally filed. That has a lot more credibility now, right? Because they're not all the same. And what these CGs see through TDS is the same thing over and over and over and over again, because there's a template. They go into TDS. TDS isn't staffed to do this type of work. I used to run a TDS office in a prior life in Korea. I understand that. You don't have time to do 20 GOMOR rebuttals in a week. It's just not staffed for that. So you give a template, and the template and the soldier usually ranks the GOMOR rebuttal, and you may edit it. And they always lose, because it's the same thing over and over and over again. So it goes back to each one of these GOMOR rebuttals, no matter where you're at, what type of case, must be handcrafted. It can't be McDonald's. It just can't be. And they're so important. You wouldn't think it's that important. But it's like, well, why would you pay $15,000, $20,000 for a GOMOR rebuttal? When everyone, that's the money it takes to dedicate the amount of time for multiple attorneys and to do an investigation and draft these. That's actually, and frankly, Jason, that's undervaluing these. But at a certain point, it's just an ability for our clients to pay. But that's frankly undervaluing the amount of work that goes into these.
Yeah.
It really is. If we build these by the hour, they'd be 3 times that.
Okay. That answers the question. So you don't necessarily, because people are going to be wondering if they're watching this podcast or listening to this video, well, I mean, how much is it really going to be? Is it a flat rate? Do you charge by the hour? Because, that's how lawyers, especially civilian attorneys operate. And so, they have to evaluate, do I go ahead and use my free resources, or do I hire somebody who I think is going to help me win?
Yeah. I don't bill by the hour. I rarely do. When I do, I bill $550 an hour. That's the rate I bill at. If I do 20 hours, you're at $11,000. And so I don't want to be in a position where I'm halfway through a GOMOR. And that's just me. Then we've got Ben's time as well, which is less expensive, but that is also Ben's time. Now I'm halfway through it. I need to do 6 more interviews, and the client's out of money. Well, I've run through your $10,000. Here's your work product. Give it to TDS. I want a client to know when they hire me, they're going to get the product they paid for. And so I flat rate this. I'll listen to the type of case it is. GOMOR rebuttals are typically $10,000. Very rarely are they $10,000. But if you have a very, very simple one that is relatively easy, and by the way, I say that, but they never are, because the client always describes it as something very easy. We open up Pandora's box, and it's not. But they're typically $15,000 to $20,000 to do a GOMOR rebuttal. That's the range you're typically in, because that's frankly the amount of time it takes to do these and put these together. But I do them as a flat rate because I don't want to be halfway through a rebuttal and we run out of funds and I can't deliver the product. Or I'm halfway through and I run down a rabbit hole and see something that the client didn't see. Now I need to interview 5, 6, 7 more people, get sworn statements, build all of this in. That's all additional work we're taking on. And that's a risk I take, frankly, as that's the managing attorney of the law firm. It's a calculated risk I take, saying I'll take a fee for $15,000. It's a flat fee. I kind of guess or have an estimate of how many hours will go into it, because I've done hundreds of these before, but we usually go over. And again, I typically undervalue these, but at the same time, our GOMOR rebuttals win. Not everyone does, but our GOMOR rebuttals win. And if you look at what's at stake, if you lose a GOMOR rebuttal, you're really, that's the beginning of the end of your career. So let's say you're 15 years in and you're a sergeant first class. You have a GOMOR rebuttal that's permanently filed for sexual harassment. That's a really common when we talk about BH fraud, sexual harassment, inappropriate workplace comments. I didn't like the way he looked at me. He would glare at me. He would undress me with his eyes. And the sergeant first class, what the hell are you talking about? I didn't do any of that. And it's now he said, she said. Well, if that gets permanently filed in your file, you're done. You are never getting promoted. you will never get promoted if you have a sharp allegation with a permanent GOMOR. And not only that, but the next phase from there is you're going to be chaptered out. And in the Army, it's under AR 635-200 for the enlisted separations. And there's a different regulation for officers. But you're going to be chaptered out, which means you're going to go through an administrative separation board. If you have less than 6 years of service, you're not even going to have a right to a board, which means you're going to get a piece of paper from the brigade commander and you're out of the Army with not with a bad conduct, but with a general under honorable conditions discharge. You're not getting your honorable. But most individuals who receive GOMORs and most soldiers have over 6 years out, because you typically don't give a GOMOR to a private or a PFC or a specialist. We usually see them given to NCOs and officers. So now your entire career is at risk over, you want to save some money and do it yourself or go to TDS. They do a bad job or you do a bad job because you don't know how to do it. And now your career's stagnated. You're never going to get promoted. And you're going to go through a board to potentially get kicked out. And you're going to lose your retirement, lose the benefits, get the OTH. All these negative consequences are going to happen. And without an attorney, I go back to what I said at the beginning of this session. You have 7 days to save your career. Good luck doing it. If you're a supply sergeant, you know how to draft these, you know how to put these together, you know how to interview people. You don't even have the right to interview people. People are going to talk to you, right? And so how are you going to interview all these people? How are you going to get sworn statements? How are you going to put all this together in a way that's compelling to the commanding general and save your career when you have 7 days to do it? It's fundamentally unfair, but that's just whether it's fair or not, it doesn't matter. You and I offline, we talk football a lot. Our big football fans. There's a lot of calls that are unfair, right? You can yell, refs, you suck all day long from the stands, but the call is going to stand.
The call. The
call's the call. And that's the way it is. And you can't change that. So these are incredibly important. And people don't realize how important they are until they lose them.
So you're talking about GOMORs. Those are specifically for Army. I was in the Marine Corps, obviously, you know that. And what's the equivalent for a GOMOR in the Marine Corps?
Yeah, it's a punitive. There's an LOR or an LOA, a letter of reprimand, a letter of admonishment. There's what's called a NIPLOC, a non-punitive letter of admonishment. So it's the same concept. It's the same concept across the board. What we see, though, is it's just not utilized with the frequency it is in the Army. I will get maybe 1 or 2 calls from other services. I probably see less than 5 calls a year where I'm getting 50, 75 a year on GOMORs.
From Army.
And so from the Army. And so there is the equivalent. The Air Force does utilize it. Navy and Marine Corps, not that often. What you see in the Navy and Marine Corps is let's just go right to NJP. We're not going to waste the CG's time. The CG's busy fighting wars. Right? The commanding general doesn't want to be brought in on all this. What you see in the Marine Corps is here's your NJP or your summary court OTH. What the Marine Corps does is they take a different approach to it. What they'll do is they'll put you in pretrial confinement, right? Stick you in the brig, give you a summary court martial, and say the maximum punishment at a summary court martial is 30 days. On day 5, while you're in the brig, they'll give you a plea agreement saying you plead guilty to the summary court martial and waive your administrative separation board. We won't charge you we won't take it to a higher level court martial. They fast track it. Marine Corps just short circuits all this nonsense. And they just go straight to NJP, summary court martial, and then that's that for what's called a COSO, which is commission of a serious offense. So we're not writing these same memorandums to Marine Corps generals because, frankly, the command doesn't want to involve Marine Corps generals in this nonsense. What we see in the Marine Corps, NJPs. I see 5 times the amount of NJPs in the Marine Corps than any other service. The Marine Corps loves the Article 15 or the NJP. And they use that to set up a pattern of misconduct or what's called a COSO, commission of a serious offense, and kick you out the door that way. Because in the Marine Corps, you were in the Marine Corps. My son is getting ready to enlist in the Marine Corps, if you didn't know that.
Oh.
So, yes, my son's getting ready to stand on the yellow footprints, and when he graduates high school, he's going to be an enlisted Marine, which is awesome. But they take a different approach. We're not going to, if we need to bring this to the commanding general, that's a leadership failure. Why didn't we handle it at our lower level? Which, frankly, is the right approach. Company commander, regimental, battalion commander, let's handle it at our level and not have to involve the commanding general unless it's serious enough, which is a court martial. But the Army doesn't do that. The Army's just broken.
Mhm.
It's just broken. And so it's just a different way of doing things. So these GOMORs are almost specifically geared to Army clients because I just don't see them in the other services in the same way.
So when something like this does happen to somebody in the Marine Corps or the Navy or something, are you the attorney to go to at this point? Because it's not like, because you've told me before, right? If you're facing NJP, I'm not your guy. I'm your, if you're facing military court martials, yes. NJP's not so much. So if somebody's listening right now, should they continue to look for you for advice on this, or where do you want to send these people?
It depends on the severity of it, right? And so if you have a low-level NJP, I don't need a Marine, a young enlisted Marine, to go spend $10,000, $15,000 when that's 6 months of his paycheck for me to draft an NJP response that, frankly, the Defense Service Office can draft for him or her. And I tell that to them almost every time. And if you're a young Marine and you're facing NJP and you want to do a consultation, I will do that every day of the week. If you need a consultation and hey, I can't afford to have me represent you, but you want me to point you in the right direction, I will do that as a free service.
Nice.
Almost every time.
Nice.
I can't tell you how many times I do that where I walk a Marine. I do this for a lot of Marines. We love the Marine Corps at our law firm. We have a lot of Marines we represent. We represent more Marines than any other service. As I put my money where my mouth is, my son's about to be an enlisted Marine. Mm-hmm. But really, if you're any service, but in particular, if you're a Marine, you're getting NJP'd. I did this yesterday. I had a Marine at Camp Schwab call me on some moderate drug offenses for vaping some vape juice that was illegal. They're going to give him NJP. He doesn't need to spend $10,000, $15,000 hiring me to do that. I spent about half an hour on the phone with this Marine. I walked him through exactly what he needs to do, how to do it, and I set him up with one of the officers who I know who's exceptionally good at the Defense Service Office at Camp Foster. I basically did a warm handoff, and he's good to go. And a lot of other civilian attorneys would try to bill him for $2,500 or $5,000. Yeah, right. What do you have?
Get what they can get, right?
And I just don't. I do not do that. I built a practice. My entire career, I'm not going to do that. If you don't need legal representation or you don't need civilian defense counsel, I'm going to be the first to tell you that. But I'm going to say, listen, here's what you do need to do. And so, yeah, if you have a low-level offense and you're a junior Marine, you don't need to spend the money for this. You really don't. But if you need advice, I'll walk you through it, and I'll do that for free. I do it every time. I'll do that for free. Now, that being said, if you're a gunny and you've got an NJP, and that's going to drive a COSA, which is a commission of a serious offense, which could kick you out of the military, we're dealing with a whole hell of a lot more than NJP, right? We're dealing with, if you get found guilty at the NJP, you're going to be potentially kicked out of the Marine Corps. And so in a case like that, where you have retirement on the line, you're a staff NCO, you're a JO, or you're an officer, there's a lot more at stake. Mm-hmm. And so that's the case that may make sense for me to take on.
Right.
You've got 16, 17 years in, you're looking at E8, you've got NJP for some nonsense, or maybe something that's very serious. We need to put that defense together, because if you're found guilty of that, you're going to be at an ADSET board, or we need to set this up for the ADSET board. What I mean by that is, we may know you're going to be found guilty through your command. I mean, you may say, sir, I know my command. They're going to find me guilty. What can you do? Well, we can put all the mitigation together and try to mitigate this, so that way when it does go to an administrative separation board, all the legwork's already done. Because infrequently in the Marine Corps, these administrative separation boards want to know how you handled it at the lower level. Integrity is everything in every service, but in particular the Marine Corps. So if there's a situation where you screwed up and you need to fall on your sword and die on that hill, we'll tell you that. And maybe you do need to fall on your sword, but we need to put all the mitigating, extenuating circumstances out there. So if it does go to the administrative separation board, you can maintain your integrity. And I've seen a lot of administrative separation boards where the board members will find a basis for misconduct. What that means, the board members find, the misconduct occurred, but it doesn't rate separation, or it doesn't warrant separation. And a lot of it's because of the way the Marine handled themselves. That's Marine Corps. It's not Marine Corps specific, but it's Marine Corps specific, if you know what I mean.
Yep, I do.
The Army, fall on your sword and say, thanks for your service, see you later. In the Marine Corps, having integrity in the way you handle the situation means a lot. It means a tremendous amount. So if you screwed something up, if you've been in 16 years, you're a staff NCO, and you have a one-time screw up and it's because of maybe it's PTSD from a combat deployment, maybe it's because you're going through a divorce, maybe it's financial issues. There's a whole list of issues, or maybe you just had really bad leadership and you didn't know how to deal with it, or a toxic environment, and you had some misconduct and you have to take ownership of that. Instead of saying, no, I didn't do that. If that's the situation, we can advise, yeah, take ownership of it. Let's put all the reasons behind it. And maybe more importantly, why it won't happen again. That way, if we go to a board, I can call you as a witness. You can hold your head up high, take the witness stand, and look those Marines in the eye and say, Roger, I did this. I take full responsibility for it. Full stop. Once you do that, in certain cases, the board members are like, okay, I want to hear what you have to say now. As opposed to, well, I don't know, and I don't know why this happened, and why this blah, blah, blah. You're out. And that's all services, but Marine Corps specific at the same time.
Yeah.
And if you're in the Marines, if you're a Marine, you know exactly what I'm
talking about. The culture of that, for sure.
That's the culture. And the boards we win where the misconduct is obvious is the boards where the staff NCO or the JO or the officer says, I take full, this is what occurred. I take full ownership for that. There's no excuses. Here's why, and here's why it won't happen again. Full stop. And you can say that with confidence, and we walk you through how to do all of that. Again, at these boards, even if you committed the misconduct, they need to know you, like you, and trust you. And what that means, the board, they know you, they know who you are, your background, what drives you, what makes you a Marine, why you took this action. That's the know you piece. Don't like you. It doesn't mean they want to go out and drink beers with you. But is this a Marine I want to continue to serve with? Is this a gunny I want on my team? If I have to go push down range or I'm on a me, was this someone I want on my team? That's the like part. You have to know you, like you. And the most important part is trust. Do they trust you? Because the minute they don't trust you, you're out. And oh, by the way, if they don't trust your lawyer, they don't trust you. Because your lawyer is the one who's representing you. In particular, if it's a civilian, you chose that lawyer. You chose that particular lawyer. So if they show up and they're grossly overweight, their hair looks like trash, they're rolling in alligator skin shoes, and they look like a slob, they don't know the Marine Corps culture, if they look up coming in, I'm sorry, but you're going to lose credibility. They can be the most brilliant lawyer, but if they look up, you're just one more thing to overcome. I'm not saying they can't overcome it, in particular in the Marine Corps. They may look sharp, but if they can't present well, if they can't speak, if they don't understand culture, they don't understand what the Marine Corps is about, and they're representing you, you lose credibility as the Marine. And that's all services, but again, in particular, the Marine Corps.
Almost an unwritten rule there, not anything that anybody's going to admit to, but that's what's going on in the heads of the people that are making the decisions.
Sure. I mean, if you've ever been into a Marine Corps trial, you know that it is very formal. Appearance is everything. It's how you hold yourself out and present yourself. I have been out of the military for longer than I was in. I've been out almost 15 years now. I mean, look at my haircut. I still have a military haircut. I mean, I'm Marine Corps, right? This is a haircut. I still work out 6 days a week. I'm still in good shape. I could run or PT with Marines and not totally lose it. I'm not at that level, but I'm in good shape. And part of that is it's self-discipline. And it's how you present yourself. You have to present yourself with confidence and be disciplined because it reflects on the individual you're representing. Less so in other services, but it's definitely high in the Marine Corps. I always tell the story, and I've told it to you before, where I did a court-martial in Okinawa, Japan, where I called a witness in. The witness was a Marine. He walked up to the witness stand, and I had a senior NCO on the jury call him out and say, hey, he walked, and literally the juror said, hey, devil, why don't you square away that gig line? As he's walking up to the witness stand. He turns around, middle of the well, squares away his gig line. We all know what that is. Goes up to the witness stand. The judge looked at me. I looked at the judge like, this isn't appropriate for a member to do that. I just, and it was a full acquittal. And we talked to the jury afterwards because back then you could do hot washes with the jury. And the senior NCO, staff NCO, told me, hey, sir, you got to square away this Marine. If he doesn't care about his appearance in uniform, why should I care about his testimony? I was like, wow. And that was a long time ago. And ever since then, I really took it to heart. not just with the people I'm calling, but my client and me as well. So it goes, and we're a little off topic, but it all goes back to credibility, right? You have to have it. Your client has to have it. And when we do, whether it's the Marine Corps, whether we go back to these GOMORs we draft, these GOMOR rebuttals we draft, if you don't have credibility, you have nothing. If you don't have it, you're going to lose.
Do you ever turn down GOMORs?
Yes, absolutely.
So what are the circumstances for that?
It's first off, a lot of individuals don't want to pay the fee, and I walk right up front. Well, can you do it for this? Can you do it for $5,000? Can you do a 10-month payment plan? So a lot of it's just fee based, and other times I'll turn it down when that's one side of it. But let's say there's a case where an individual should be falling on their sword and should be explaining why, and they want to give 50 excuses which aren't justified or they're not supported by the facts. I'm not going to write that.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, it's my signature at the bottom. It's my letterhead on the top. And my law firm is built on more than one client. So a client wants me to violate the rules of professional responsibility. They're done. That happens more than you would think. They want you to lie. They want you to write things that aren't true. Done. See you later. Find someone else to do it. I'm out. I won't do that.
How often does that happen?
More often than you think.
Okay.
They want you to write things that aren't true. They want you to do things that are even borderline unethical. They're out. Go find someone else. I've fired clients for that many times.
Yeah.
Or you have cases where they don't want to follow your advice. They think they know more than you. And that's okay. But in these cases, we'll talk through, and as much as a potential client's interviewing me on these phone calls, the reality is I'm interviewing them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't need the work. What I mean by that is I'm not a brand new attorney. I'm going to take whatever comes across my desk. Thankfully, I'm not in that position. I've been doing this a long time. It's a good position to be in. It needs to be a good fit. There's a lot of lawyers that'll take your money, a lot. And that number grows every year as new JAGs get out and say, I'll not be a court-martial lawyer and try to make some money. And then they're in business for 2 years and then they're out of business, right? Happens all the time.
Yeah.
So every year.
Because they're not financially stable to make the moral decision to take the business or not take the business. You're not taking the business based upon a lack of financing or a lack of financial resources.
And so, and I'll always, and I say always, if you can't afford an attorney and you need the advice, I will give that to you. Now, if I'm in the middle of a jury trial, you may need to wait to get on my calendar. So respect my time as well, but I will give you that advice. Because there's no way in hell I can ever come up with these fees. I just don't have it. It's not going to happen, but I don't know where to go. Let me know that up front and say, hey, sir, I can't afford your services, but I really need some good advice. Just shoot me straight. I'm like, I appreciate that. And it happens more than you think. And I don't turn them down, and I always give advice because, that comes back. Number one, it's doing the right thing. Number one. And number two, sometimes that same person might be a corporal, down the road, now they're a gunny, and one of their Marines gets in trouble, and it's, hey, this is someone you can count on. This is someone you can trust. And frankly, just the right thing to do. Yeah. Right? It just is. And so people that want me to violate the rules of professional responsibility, I don't kick on. People that if I'm talking to them and I can't get a word in because they know more than I do, and maybe you do. I don't know. Maybe you do. But if it doesn't feel right on that phone call, then I turn down more cases I'll put it this way, I turn down more cases than I take on. And if you're a current client of mine, you probably know that. I'll probably say, listen, I've turned down 5 or 6 people. This is a case I can take on. Or if you're watching this and you've talked to me on a consultation, you can probably comment on this. That, yeah, I talked to him. He told me I wasn't a good fit for his law firm. No hard feelings. And I'll refer you out. Or I'll always make sure you're in a better position than when you started. But it has to be a good fit for us. It has to be a good fit for the service member. And then the finances come later. Right. Yep.
So how many times you were talking about before where when GOMOR specifically, you've got 7 days to submit your rebuttal. How many times do you actually get new clients like that they come to you where you don't have any knowledge of them and they're saying, I just got hit with this GOMOR. Can you help me? What do you do in that situation? Because there's literally no time to prepare and then, present is within that 7-day period.
Unfortunately, a majority of those cases I can't take on.
Okay.
And it's really a timing issue. I was in Camp Zama last month doing a court-martial on a parental discipline abuse case. We had a full acquittal on it. That's something I'd love to talk with you about on another time. Parental discipline in the military is fascinating. It was a fascinating trial. But I'm knee-deep in representing an NCO who's fighting for her career, her life, and her family. I had 3 calls that week while I was at Camp Zama for GOMORs. 2 in Korea, 1 CONUS. I had to turn all 3 down. 2 of them I wanted to take. One wasn't a good fit for us. Because I couldn't touch that case until I finished the trial I was in. And by then, I need to onboard that client. They need to, do all the contract with us. Then I have to file a continuance request or an extension request. And my representation would be contingent upon getting that approved. There's just no way for that to happen. And so I referred those 2 other clients out to other attorneys, and hopefully they did a good job for them. And so it's one of timing. Now, if they called now, I'm not in trial this week. I have no trials coming up until February. I've got white space on my calendar. If you called today as we're filming this and you had a GOMOR, I have the bandwidth to be able to do that if it's the right case. But if I'm in the middle of a trial, then I don't. And so the key there is if you're under investigation in the Army, CID investigation, an AR-15-6 command investigation, the likelihood of that going to a GOMOR is frankly fairly high if you are an E5, E6 and above, or if you're an officer. Retain us now. That way, your current client, I can work into our battle rhythm. I understand your case. And let's say we're in day 2 of the trial. You are our current client and you get a GOMOR. Now, funny enough, this happened, Jason, the day before trial, or the Friday before trial. One of our clients got notified for a GOMOR. And Ben and I were like, this is just Murphy's Law. It's the timing of it. Ben reached out to the JAG. We have a relationship with that JAG. That JAG knows we're representing the soldier. We had a read ahead on the GOMOR and said, hey, we're in trial at Camp Zama this week. We needed 3 weeks because the holidays were there. JAG said, no problem. You got it. No problem. Because I had a good relationship with that JAG. He did that to us, and we were able to finish the trial, file the GOMOR. Had that client called us on the Friday before, no way I would have been able to take that. The reality is a lot of that work was front-loaded because the minute that client hired us, which was 6 months prior, I understood that case very well, and so did Ben. So we knew where we needed to go with it. We knew what needed to happen. So to your question of, do I get calls a lot where someone has a GOMOR, they have 7 days, it is much more difficult for me to take those on based on my current op-tempo, battle rhythm, whatever you want to call that, where if someone's a current client, significantly easier.
Is there a way to become a current client if you're not in trouble? In other words, you feel like things are coming down the pike. Is it ever too early to hire a civilian defense attorney when you're in the military?
If you're not under investigation or you don't think anything's going to come of it, then maybe not. But if you're under investigation, if an allegation has been made against you, no, it's really not too early. That's the best time to call. If an allegation was made against you today or yesterday, now is the time to call. And as I've said all from the beginning, whether it's me or Ben, we will shoot you straight and say, listen, this is so minor, or it's what you think it is isn't what it is. You don't need counsel. Do A, B, C, D, and E, and you'll be set up for success. I'll do that every time.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, if it's, hey, I just have my bank account subpoenaed for BH fraud. This is a call I got yesterday. Do I need an attorney?
Absolutely.
Yes. You sure do.
Time.
You sure do.
Yeah.
Because a subpoena means there's probable cause and the magistrate's involved. And I walk through all the reasons why you need an attorney now, where someone else may or may not. So if you're under investigation, no, it's really never too early. And if it is too early, I will let you know that is too early. And then you'll have my contact information. I'll have notes of our phone call. And then if something does come a week, a month, 6 months later, say, hey, Mr. Bilecki, I remember we talked. Yeah, I do. Yeah, now it's time. Right. But most of the time when people are under investigation, it's not true. Say no. Hey, I was just accused of sexual assault. CID brought me in. They took my DNA from me. They took a buccal swab. I had my bank account subpoenaed. I was arrested at the gate coming back in. NCIS came and tore my barracks apart. Hey, they seized my phone. This I hear every day. Yes, if those things happen, you're under investigation. You need a lawyer, whether that's us, whether that's a free lawyer. When those events happen, you need an attorney, because that may go to a court martial, it may go to a GOMOR, it may go to NJP, or maybe if we get involved early, nothing will happen. But one of the things, if you know, it's as opposed to, hey, so I got pulled over for speeding on base last night. My command's going to be really unhappy with it. Do I need a lawyer? No, you don't. I got pulled over for speeding on base last night, and they found fentanyl in my trunk. Do I need a lawyer? Yeah, you do. You do.
Yeah, absolutely. Circling back to GOMORs specifically, anything else that people should know that we haven't covered during this interview, this podcast, that will help them navigate through probably one of the toughest times of their life?
Yeah, the bottom line is, in the Army, if you're under what's called an AR-15-6 investigation, which is a command investigation, other services call it a CI or a PI, preliminary or command investigation, you need a lawyer, bottom line. Because that command investigation, that 15-6 investigation, that we either substantiate or unsubstantiate the investigation. If a lawyer can get that unsubstantiated, you're never going to a GOMOR, you're moving on. But if that's substantiated, most 15-6 investigations in the Army turn into GOMORs. So don't wait. If you get notified of a 15-6 investigation and you're in the Army, you need a lawyer. Bottom line, whether that's us or whether that's TDS or someone else, because that's where we can do the vast majority of the work prior to you ever getting to the GOMOR. And if we can do the work well enough there, depending on the facts and circumstances, you may never get the GOMOR to begin with. So don't wait until you get called into your commander's office and the 7-day clock ticks to start trying to get on my calendar. If you're in that position, call me and hopefully we can make it work. But it's substantially easier, and it's substantially easier and to win when we get involved as early in the process is possible.
Well, Tim, as always, it's been a pleasure talking to you about these things, these legal things that a lot of people, they get caught up in the boring end of it. This is fascinating to me, just because there's so many different twists in the things that you encounter. It's always good to hear straight from the horse's mouth what's happening out there and how you're combating it all.
Yeah, and that's the bottom line. There's all different ways this could play out, and I can at least walk someone through all of the vast majority of the scenarios and get them set up for success. They don't end up losing their career they've worked so hard for over some investigation.